Okay, there we are.
Great. All right. Well, let's talk about this because I think your approach to this was so thoughtful.
Uh-huh.
You know, you teach young children, right? You're online. So when you think about, especially standard 5, the potential for a project,
Mhm.
what would that be? It's very difficult. And I've seen some little things that, kids do on their own. They create it on their own, and that's fine. I think that does go along with this. But I personally felt, and I hope your instructor does the same, that you demonstrated, I mean, definitely standard 4, you absolutely understand
Mm.
your content, you know how to do this. And that's a critical piece.
Mm.
And then making it meaningful. And so I think all the things you do relate to students' real lives,
Mm.
right? The curriculum, it relates to their lives. And I love how you expanded into the idea of flags and countries.
Mm.
I don't know how much they actually understand about that,
Mm.
but it's kind of a start, and it kind of stretches them a little bit, even though it's kind of abstract for them, maybe a little bit at this point. They can relate to their own country. Okay, so this is where I live, and so you can build on that. But I love that. I think that you've just done a great job. So I'm talking too much. Now I want you to talk.
Well, no, I really appreciate that because that whole part is really kind of about like the global mindedness and global awareness, and so like in class when we first introduced it, I asked them. Fortunately, I know coincidentally a fair amount of countries in Chinese. And so that was really helpful, because Mexico is Moshige, so it sounds quite similar. So I was kind of able to CCQ the students when we were in person, and just really legitimately see if they understood. Because some students, for example, they really mixed up Italy and Mexico's flag quite often, which is why I always reiterated that Mexico has something on it, whereas Italy doesn't. And that in Mexico they wear big hats, referring to sombreros. So that's kind of also like delivering, I guess the cultural aspect of it as well. Yeah.
No, I think it's lovely. I think about that with my own grandchildren. We've looked at maps, and when we lived in China, okay, here's China, and now we live in Oregon, here's Oregon. And it's still abstract, but it's a base. And so as they read stories or they hear about things, it's something to build on.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I love that you did it. And your work with your individual students, honestly, that helps us as we understand the next video, which is your 6, 7, and 8, right? Because you've already kind of demonstrated your assessments. And so in the next one, you can talk or focus on, now where do you go from here? What do you, oh, they are so darling. It was just so much fun to watch. And I don't remember their names, but the first little girl, what do you do with that? She's amazing. So how would you differentiate, and I know it's tricky online because, right, you have, it's difficult to differentiate, but you might address, and I'm talking about the future next video, but how do you provide appropriate instruction for her? And so you might have to go into hypothetical world in your reflection and as we discuss, because what kinds of activities, stations, centers could you create where you would be able to differentiate for all these different kids, and especially the ones we saw in that demonstration. So let me pull up my.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because the girl you're referencing, Catherine, she's also from Seattle. She lived in Bainbridge Island of all places with her mom, and her mom also graduated from Seattle University. So it's, in this regard, it's kind of a almost eerily small world.
Boy, isn't that the truth? Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, she was darling. And the way you handled, and I could see how you were adjusting what you were doing.
Mm,
Uh, right? You definitely were pushing her to where
mm,
to really the highest level, right? And
mm.
then the little boy, oh, he had two little boys.
Oh, yeah, we had Tom, and then we had our other student with some differently abled. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, Frank. So that's Frank.
And I thought, it gave you some really great data about Frank.
Mm, mm,
I thought, because that's hard to get when you're in an individual or when you're in the class, right?
mm.
So that was so valuable to know kind of where you can go with him.
Sorry to cut you off, but Frank's a really interesting case, and of course, there's the aspect where he can do it, but like we saw in the video, maybe he'll refuse. In some ways, he was saying like either I don't want to or I'm not able to. But I know under other circumstances, he very well could do it. But I also know that he's incredibly gifted with memorization. So
Oh,
he's incredibly gifted. He can actually write um, English, at least letters, fairly well freehanded already, um, which is quite impressive for this age group. We're not really allowed to give like writing worksheets or anything, but he's already quite good at it. He can write his name quite legibly. Um, so for him, I think it's kind of differentiating more for like the memorization part. So he can meet some of the assessment requirements.
well, and he struck me as possibly, I mean, you never would want to say anything, but almost potentially on the spectrum.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
and that kind of focus on memorization and writing,
mm,
sometimes those kids are very focused on that.
mm, yeah.
But when you're talking to them, putting them on the spot, if they feel uncomfortable, boy, they're just done. They just shut down and they'll
Yeah.
find any way to get away from it.
Well, it's funny you
So
mentioned that because in class, I'm like, "Hey, Frank, how are you today?" He just looks at me, and that's it. Like he's like, this glance is just, "You're not gonna get anything out of me right now, dude." So
no, it's
yeah,
it's very protective. They get very anxious.
yeah.
And so visuals work with them.
Mm,
You
mm,
can say, hey, come over here. Which one of these are you? Or
mm,
pictures about routines. And so it's not focused on them,
mm, mm,
right? Because that's when they'll shut down. It's focused on the task. It's, I'm looking over here. Now, some kids chose this, some kids chose this. What do you think about that? So I thought you handled him really well because you kept him going. Really. You just kind of had a natural way of kind of keeping him going.
Oh, thanks. Sometimes I really wasn't sure if I should pause or if I should like skip to the next part. But I still feel like it's important to kind of like pause and maybe give him the opportunity to maybe regain composure instead of just saying next. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes, exactly.
okay, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That was great. Yeah. And, of course, in terms of project-based learning, I honestly, it's kind of early here and I forgot to pull it up again, but I think I gave you a proficient,
Uh-huh.
and only because some of it is kind of impossible right now, right?
Mhm.
Because, and again, when you're in the classroom, you're actually hands-on with kids. I mean, you can do so much more.
Mhm.
So anyway, but proficient is good. It's good.
Yeah, the thing was, I tried to get them to kind of create a project where they would kind of introduce something like, oh, maybe say like some stats, just like, my name is Douglas, I'm 5 years old, and then almost kind of present some of it themselves and then perform a song. But the trouble really is actually that the parents don't want to really bother with that part, so I couldn't really use that. So
Well, and what you find especially in online is either that, if you give them a project or the parents do it.
And this is
Right.
also what happened in a few of the videos that I didn't include.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really tricky. I think that the focus of what is in Standard 5 that's most important is, real world connection,
Mhm.
where, they're connecting these words and things to their own lives, and certainly interdisciplinary, which you did. You brought in, the flags and everything. So there's a lot to that, and a lot of it does happen in early childhood classrooms. So I think that's it. Any
Okay.
other questions for me?
We covered both standard 4 and 5, right? Just double checking.
Yes.
Okay, just
Yes.
want to be sure.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think for right now that covers everything.
Okay.